Um, so hello all, warm welcome to this event entitled, What Does the Rise of the Global South Mean for Britain? My name is Sequoia D'Souza and I'll be co-chairing tonight's event with my esteemed and noble colleague, Ileana Chan.
Hi.
This event is being organised by No Cold War Britain, the British group of the International No Cold War Campaign, which was set up to oppose the new Cold War and build a world based on cooperation rather than domination. Participants, as I mentioned, you're welcome to use the chat function, but there is one condition: you have to be civil. No unnecessary abuse. Please note that this is being recorded and will be put on our YouTube channel in the coming days. And the very fact that you're here means, if this is not too bold to say, you're engaged in understanding and improving the world. So in order to hear about future events of that nature and further information, please do follow us on social media, and these will be put into the chat during the course of the event. Now, as I mentioned, the event will be running until 8:30, by which time you'll have listened to the insights of our great panel of speakers. These include Sami Ramadani, Iraqi-born lecturer and writer on Middle East current affairs, followed by Roger Mackenzie, Morningstar International editor, then Isabella Yasmin Kajiwara, who's editor of Shadow magazine, William Sakawa, a correspondent for African Stream, Radhika Desai, director of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group, Vijay Prashad, director of Tricontinental Institute, and Fiona Edwards of No Cold War International and No Cold War Britain. Now, in a context where dissenting views and voices are drowned out, it's great to see so many people here who want to understand the shifting dynamics of the present moment and to move beyond a unipolar world based on domination. The world is transforming and the global south, the global majority, is rising. We have seen the emergence of growing international blocs such as BRICS, which will now include Argentina, Egypt, Iran, and others, and the G77 plus China, through which nations are asserting their right to forge paths of cooperation and independence rather than domination and threats. But instead of embracing this vision of global cooperation, the British government has continued its role as the United States' literal, albeit junior, partner in crime. Military buildup and threats against China, fueling and escalating NATO's proxy war against Russia, and material, diplomatic, and military support for the barbaric destruction of Gaza, described by former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Craig McIver, as a textbook case of genocide. And let me remind you that the apartheid regime has been murdering 125 children every day for 38 days straight. Now, it's often been said that Palestine is the litmus test, and the British government and opposition have horrifically failed that test and stand with apartheid and genocide. But millions of people in Britain and around the world understand the deep and painful injustice being committed. There is a global majority in support of Palestine. And in many ways, their struggle for freedom embodies the broader global struggle for a world free of colonial and imperial oppression. And on that note, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Sami Ramadani, Iraqi-born lecturer and writer on Middle East current affairs. Over to you.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. Okay. Thank you for the invitation. I think we live in quite critical times in many ways. Events are showing that the Middle East, it's a British name, by the way, Middle East, we should call it East Asia or Western Asia or whatever geographic location. Anyway, but the Middle East is proving to be quite a critical region in terms of the regional politics of very important strategic states in the region, and also the entire Arab world stretching from as far as Algeria in the west to the Gulf and Iraq, in the east, a massive region, plus Turkey and Iran bordering the region, and the entire Mediterranean region. So quite a critical area. And the United States, it seems, has underestimated the power of the peoples of the region to change the political map and to shake the status quo very violently and radically. And this is where I think the events in the Middle East today have boiled down to a complete destruction of the previous status quo. So you can talk about pre and post 7 October 2023. You can see it in terms of the fact that Israel has been exposed, that few hundred Palestinians could actually inflict quite a shocking event on the apartheid state. And the fact that the Palestinian people, probably for the first time in many decades, have taken the initiative, and they have refocused attention on the plight of the Palestinian people and their just cause. The entire Arab world is up in arms in terms of the streets. I mean, we see demonstration, obviously massive demonstrations in London and across the world. But in the Arab world, there is an edge to these demonstrations. And this edge is reflected in the new generation of youth who have suddenly rediscovered Palestine, rediscovered the importance of the Palestinian struggle, and importantly, rediscovered that Israel, without US imperialist support, is a state which is very vulnerable, very weak, and it cannot continue occupation and expansion and aggression without US support. This has become so clear. The Arab street is talking in terms of the United States itself running this war, running this battle, and that Israel would not dare take any major decision in relationship to the war without US say so. And the United States itself, obviously, we also have Biden rushed to Israel, our Western leaders, including Rishi Sunak, emerging from a transporter military plane to land in Israel, giving the apartheid state full rich support. One other aspect which is important to bear in mind is that Israel on its own cannot possibly subdue the Palestinian people anymore and get away with it. The Palestinian cause has acquired a strategic depth which was lacking in the past because of the betrayal of the Arab regimes. The Palestinian cause is supposed to have had the Arab strategic depth, Arab people's strategic depth surrounding Palestine, but the betrayal of various Arab regimes denied the Palestinian people such a strategic depth. While today they have acquired that depth in the shape of the Lebanese resistance, the Iraqi resistance, and miraculously the Yemeni resistance, which has stood in the face of a most brutal US-inspired Saudi-led war on them for so many years now. The starvation and the siege of Yemen has proven also futile in the face of the Yemeni people's resistance. So this wide alliance, also backed by Iran, friendly to Russia and China, has enormous implications, not only for the region, but worldwide. So this has to be borne in mind, that the Palestinian people are no longer alone, that they have acquired a strategic depth, and this strategic depth is both regional as well as having an international dimension. You can see that both Russia, China, and all the BRICS countries are calling for an immediate ceasefire, which is both the demand of the Palestinian people and the liberation movements across the Arab world. And that does imply a certain direction into the future, that the Middle East region and the conflicts in the Middle East do have an immediate international impact, international dimension, which strengthens the people's cause across the world, that these demonstrations across the world are also an expression of the yearning for freedom, yearning to oppose oppression, yearning to oppose imperialist domination. So they are not only opposing Israeli aggression and genocidal war, but they are also expressing their own people's struggles against US hegemony and US domination in the world. And that has to be borne in mind. And I think you were absolutely right in referring to the Palestinian cause as a litmus test of people's stance in terms of how progressive they are, how they see the world, are they opposed to imperialism or not? So the Palestine cause has this enormous international dimension. One other aspect which has to be borne in mind, that the war on the Palestinian people is actually beneficial to the creation of a multipolar world. That a multipolar world has become an absolute necessity for the peoples of the world. That the days when the United States is pushing its weight around and bullying the nations of the world are numbered. And the conflict over Gaza and the demand for a free Palestine are directly helping the creation of that multipolar world, focusing attention on the US imperialist aggression, the fact that they use Israel as their advanced military base to not only oppress the Palestinian people, but threaten the entire region. This is, I think, is quite important to note. One other issue that needs to be raised. Often people ask about Hamas and the various Palestinian organizations. Ideologically, I'm not a supporter of Hamas. Historically, I supported other Palestinian organizations, and I still do. But it's important to note that Hamas is a part and parcel of the struggle of the Palestinian people, and it's part of their liberation movement. We might not agree with some of their tactics. We might even oppose some of their tactics. But this is besides the point in terms of recognizing that this movement is a mass movement. It has become an essential part of the Palestinian people's struggle, no matter how much our ideological or political stance might diverge from its ideology and politics. It is definitely a popular movement. It has become more and more popular. It has surpassed its historical origins and so on, and has integrated itself, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, within the axis, within the alliance of anti-imperialist resistance in the region. And it has been adopted by the anti-imperialist movements in the region. Left-wing movements and genuine patriotic and anti-imperialist movements have accepted Hamas as part and parcel of that, even if they disagree with some of its methods. And also a word of warning, all we hear about the 7th of October is the Israeli narrative. And there is no independent international organization that has gone and investigated all these Israeli allegations. And Israel has a very, very long record of spreading lies and anti-Palestinian propaganda. So unless there is some solid evidence, we cannot even pronounce on some of the allegations against the Palestinian resistance. One other point is that within Gaza, the entire spectrum of the Palestinian political scene is engaged in the struggle in Gaza. Nearly every major political movement that is Palestinian has a resistance wing that is active in Gaza and active in the West Bank. And talk about the West Bank, some 170 people have been killed so far by Israel who joined in demonstrations in support of the people of Gaza and their brothers and sisters in Gaza. That was just a side point, if you like. But the main issue here is that the Palestinian struggle is part of a worldwide anti-imperialist movement, and that this movement will also contribute very positively to the creation and defeat of US, creation of a multipolar world, and hopefully the defeat of US imperialism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sami. Awesome. Thank you for setting our webinar up and centering the Palestinian struggle with the wider context of anti-imperialism. Our next speaker is Roger Mackenzie, Morningstar International editor, and incidentally, our very first guest on our newly launched No Cold War podcast. So check that out, guys. Welcome, Roger, and thank you.
Thank you. I'm actually still wondering how I've managed to blag my way onto this brilliant panel of speakers, because I'm like a little fanboy at the moment, thinking of listening to all of these wonderful contributions that there's going to be tonight. I'm told I've only got 8 minutes, so let me get straight to the point. What I thought about when I thought about my contribution to this meeting was, first of all, making sure that I didn't cover the sort of ground that everybody else was going to cover. But the second thing was to think very deeply about the question itself, about what it means for Britain. And when I started to think about that, I started to think, well, not everybody in Britain is the same, because there's a load of us who have roots in the global south that live in the global north. So we're sitting here, as I am now, in the belly of the beast, and I have a very different experience to a lot of my comrades in the movement up here. And I think that has to be taken into account and drawn on when we're thinking about what this actually means for Britain. So when I was on the march with somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people, historic march on Saturday through London, one of the things that struck me the most about that was that in this country, anyway, in Britain, I have never been on a march with so many people who look more like me. It's never happened. So even when I've been on a kind of the annual anti-racist march, and there's been lots of black people on there, there's actually been loads of white people as well. But overwhelmingly on Saturday, what we saw was a massive mobilization that I haven't seen before. So where does that come from? It comes from the sort of things that we've just been hearing about, that mobilization, that awakening really of awareness, you know, that awakening of an anger for sure, but also what June Jordan years ago used to call that rage. He talked about a place of rage, and I think that's what we saw in London. We're seeing it in lots of places across the global north, where people who wouldn't necessarily come out and demonstrate or be part of a kind of political movement were on those marches on Saturday. Now, we can either say, well, that's a kind of one-off thing, and that's, you know, just the circumstances of what's the destruction of Gaza and the genocide that we're seeing against the Palestinian people there. Or we can also start to think that there's something here that we can look to build in terms of organizing people to be part of something bigger, because eventually at the cost of thousands of deaths that we've already seen, and likely more to come, because people won't stop it, and the so-called world leaders are refusing to stop this genocide from taking place, eventually it will stop. And what I think would be a real sadness, really, in many ways, is we've not started to think about how we build the movement that's going to emerge from this as well. I also, I don't like being shaped by events. I like to be somebody who tries to shape events, and I think that's not always possible. But I think as organizers, as socialists, as people who want to build that different world. I think we have to think about how we can use the mobilization that we're currently seeing to build for something bigger and better. So when we're thinking about what the rise of the global south should mean for Britain, I think one of the things that it does is that it is an opportunity for us to make a real difference in Britain as well. Because frankly, if the global south rises and it makes no difference to the fact that as a black person I can't get a job, or that I'm still being shit on basically by people who are harassing me in the street, by the police or by any employer, or by these racists that seem to have got emboldened, certainly in Britain on Saturday, who used this whole new thing that emerged that I'd never heard of before. Apparently we have an armistice weekend, which I've never heard of before. And we have an armistice Sunday that I knew about, but never an armistice weekend. But it's created specifically to try and stop people from mobilizing. But people mobilized anyway. And it's that point, that anger, that we really have to turn into more than anger, but turn into a rage that's positive, that's creative, that turns into something that brings about fundamental difference. Yes, in terms of how we can stand up for the genocide that's against the genocide that's taking place in Gaza, but also how we can use that to stand up against the genocide that's taking place in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the murders that are taking place in Haiti, in the destruction of Syria that's still taking place across the world. And I think this is a real moment for us to ask ourselves the question, what are we going to do? How are we going to build that movement that's going to bring about a fundamental shift in the world in favor of working class and peasant communities across the country? So those are my thoughts. I think this is a real, genuine moment in history where we have to stand with the Palestinians, but we also have to stand with all of these other folks who are getting exploited, but also who are being attacked across the globe. I did a piece for the Morning Star for tomorrow's paper that made the point there are at least 32 conflicts taking place, major conflicts, where people across the world are getting slaughtered, and it's mostly in the global south. And these are being promoted by nations in the global north, notably the United States and their own settler colonial regime that they have over there. So I think we have to build the movement. For me, it's always about organizing. It's always about not letting people shape events for us, but as working class, as peasant communities across the world, as taking the initiative to build our own movement that responds to the demands that we want to see taking place. Those are my thoughts. Thanks very much for listening. Good luck to you all.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Roger. And of course, fascinating insights. And I entirely agree, sorry, in terms of the diversity of the demonstration, not just the most recent one, but all the protests in both Britain and across the West. They've been, in some ways, a representation of solidarity between families in our country and Palestinian families. And on one level, seeing children stand up for other children has been quite a profound thing to observe. And there was one, I won't even give her, I won't even mention her name, but there's a particular politician who's been sacked who used derogatory descriptions of the march. But I think, if anything, they're marches of love. And I think that's a really important point in terms of sort of directing that rage and channeling it. You know, out of the ashes of suffering, there's an opportunity, a duty to build something bigger. Now, moving on from those sage words from Roger, we have now Radhika Desai, who's a professor at the University of Manitoba and director of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. Sequoia. I just wanted to begin by saying that what I'm going to say is really much more in line with the original topic that was assigned, which was much before the events of the last month and more have happened. So I just want to begin by saying I completely concur with what Sammy has said, what Roger has said. And I just want to say that from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. But having said that, I just would like to make my remarks anyway, because I do think they remain relevant to what we are talking about, including the freedom of Palestine. So here goes. As the world divides between the imperialist world and the world majority, Britain's rulers seem to cling ever more tenaciously to their special relationship with the US as the leader of the former group. The mounting weight and tempo of teeming popular demonstrations in support of Palestine in Britain, in the United States, and the world in recent weeks appears to have prized that grip at least a little open, forcing imperialist governments to call for at least humanitarian pauses in the horrifying bombing of Gaza. The reason they do not go further, one suspects, has as much to do with their support for Israel as to their full knowledge that doing so would only expose their powerlessness before their rogue ally. Certainly going further in the other direction to support Israel even more unequivocally, albeit in the belief that this would position her favorably in the fourth Tory leadership election in less than 2 years, cost the British Home Secretary her job. So how far has the aperture of political possibility widened? At first glance, not much. The ruling party and the ruling class are only concerned to appear to bend to public opinion. Incoming Foreign Minister David Cameron's first phone call was, of course, to Antony Blinken, in which we are told he was reassured of Britain's cooperation on all the major flashpoints, Ukraine, Israel, China, playing as ever, with the UK playing as ever, Robin to the US Batman. The openness of the secret that the so-called Anglo-American special relationship is special to its Anglo half more than to its American one has yet to dim the ardor with which England's ruling class clings to it. There was, built when the decline of British power was well advanced and decolonization looming, and the apparatus of the much desired but never accomplished US hegemony being assembled, the special relationship was originally about defense and intelligence cooperation, Five Eyes, NATO, and the not very independent nuclear deterrent. Then there was a brief moment when Britain seemed to emerge from the Suez crisis, disillusioned, and that led to a situation in which Britain sought a European future, finally joining the European Economic Community in the 1970s with the full backing of the apex of the country's ruling class, the financial sector, that was still located in the City of London, while also seeking to fashion something like a European developmental state, complete with industrial policy. No sooner had that project got going, however, then Mrs. Thatcher's election renewed the special relationship, this time giving it a distinctive political and geopolitical economy as the foundation for the military relation. Neoliberalism was its bedrock. It appealed to both the city and the country's many multinationals, both legacies of the imperial past. Though it was clear from this time, though it was far from clear at this time, the renewed special relationship shunted the train of British politics onto a line that would lead to Brexit, leaving Britain's ruling classes ever more one-sidedly reliant on the US than ever before. Brexit Britain exults in the rhetoric of global Britain, participates in the Pacific extension of NATO, which is AUKUS, and supports the most ill-advised of the US's military misadventures even more shrilly than before. However, while the British ruling class might want to keep the aperture of political possibility tightly shut, it has not been very good at having its own way lately, and things seem to set to turn for worse, both internationally and domestically. Internationally, well before Brexit, the strongest glue binding Britain's political economy to that of the US was failing. After 2008, international financial flows plunged, and recovery still left them less than 50% of the peak. They had burgeoned as Thatcher lifted capital controls and expanded the city beyond the square mile with her Big Bang reforms. And both US and European firms stampeded into what was the least regulated financial sector in the world, the largest treasure island of the world. Since 2008, the financial sector has had to try every trick to drum up new business, taking in anything from Russian oligarchs to crypto to green finance. Since Brexit, of course, the UK financial sector has been bleeding both firms and employees to Europe. Brexit Britain has sought to build its future with a slew of free trade deals, which have turned out, however, to be mostly rollovers of agreements with the EU. And the two most prized, with the US and India, the two that are most likely to keep it on the old imperial special relationship track, have so far proved elusive. Thus cut loose, both financially and commercially, from its decades-long anchoring to the US, Britain will have little choice but to succumb to the economic gravity that China exerts around the world, and that it has already been feeling over the past decade. For example, when David Cameron, in his previous political avatar as Prime Minister, prioritized better relations with the People's Republic and even joined the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank over the loudly voiced objections of President Obama. That its trading partners also feel the same pull away from the US and towards China will inevitably structure Britain's options. Domestically, prima facie, all of Britain's multiplying problems, government fiascos, crumbling infrastructure, millions-long NHS waiting lists, cartel parties united with one another in common opposition to the people, charlatan politicians, plummeting growth and government revenues, sick cities, all of these are homegrown, the result of a cross-party commitment to neoliberal policy for 40 years, no matter the consequences. However, this is bound up with the rise of the world majority, led by China. The advance of multipolarity has been powered by a shift away from neoliberalism, with success being directly proportional to the extent to which a given country breaks with neoliberalism. And the West, particularly the two leading neoliberal countries, the US and the UK, have debilitated their productive economies, boosted production strangulating finance, precisely according to their commitment to that policy paradigm. Worse, not only have they lost productive power to the rest of the world, the neoliberal and financialized Anglo-American world has also been losing its ability to compel the rest of the world to yield up the goods it needs cheaply. Hence the return of inflation and with it higher interest rates. They are compounding the suffering of ordinary people to an acuity never before seen in over 4 decades. And this is expanding the constituency for a radically different, possibly revolutionary politics in Britain. Brexit may have misdirected popular anger, but already testified to the depth of that anger. While the British government's anti-Russian stance was comparatively successful, though not entirely so, with Palestine, the skies of dissent have opened up into a deluge. Not only can Keir Starmer no longer give free rein to his Atlanticist instincts, even the Tories have had to demonstrate some compassion, no matter how macabre its diminutiveness is. With important sections of the capitalist class themselves open to and reliant on better relations with China and other countries of the world majority, the aperture to a new post-Atlanticist Britain is wide open. It awaits only the political force that will lead Britain through it. And here my presentation joins up with Roger's, because we will need to construct this force today. That is the responsibility of every serious political anti-imperialist. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Radhika. A brilliant analysis and perhaps a hopeful note for Britain if we can get our act together. Let's hope. Our next speaker, speaking of getting our acts together, is from African Stream. So William Sakawa from African Stream, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade. It's a real pleasure to be among such brilliant minds, and I'm really enjoying the discussion so far. Now, on to the topic at hand. What does the rise of the Global South mean for Britain? As Comrade Roger mentioned, I think a proper way to look at it will be to recognize the various classes that exist within British society. And on that, I think the major, or the majority, will actually have it better. The minority, the capitalist class, which has been, benefiting most from British imperialism. Let's not forget that the British are still around. A few days ago, the British king visited Kenya, and he was given a red carpet welcome. And despite all that, he couldn't even bring himself to properly apologize for what his kingdom did during the struggle for independence, where, close to 1.5 million people were put in concentration camps. There's the thought that majority, or mostly known, that Hitler did the worst kind of stuff, by enacting violence to, the white population. But let's not lose sight of the fact that countries like Britain were having, concentration camps, gulags in Africa. But still, 60 years later or so, the king couldn't bring himself to apologize. And part of it is realizing that comes with, consequences. After an apology, what next? Now there comes the topic of reparations. Already we are seeing some British media, kind of putting it as these are just African countries looking for handouts, but in reality, the pain inflicted during the struggle for independence has consequences still felt today. The fact that, African children are uneducated, don't eat properly. Just to give you an analogy, in the DRC, for example, where Glencore, which is listed in the London Stock Exchange, operates, we have a 15-year-old child, already a mother of 10, late into the stages of HIV. And this girl, she's a girl, cannot even afford to feed a child. She's looking at death. Death is at the door. And this is the reality of a lot, tens of thousands of children operating just within Eastern Congo. And something that was mentioned was, in your consciousness, you won't expect this to happen to, say, a child from San Francisco. It's just absurd, but because it's an African child, it's normalized. So I think as the Global South develops, this will change more and more. First, I believe the looting of the Global South by Britain as a junior partner of imperialism only benefits a handful of people in Britain, the elite. Again, looking at the offshore banking system, the British Virgin Islands, London itself, this doesn't benefit majority of Britons. In fact, due to this high or the skewed housing market in London, majority of people cannot afford to live in London. Now, should Britain lose its capacity or its ability to loot the Global South, we expect that a lot less money will get into these offshore havens, which, in turn will mean maybe housing becomes a lot more affordable to people in Britain. And then moving on to, I think at the heart of it also is, this will make it a lot easier for the left in Britain to organize, which I think speaks to the role or the interconnectedness of our struggle. I believe the Global South left has to organize alongside the Global North. We all have a role to play in dismantling imperialism as it exists today. I think as the resources Britain acquires from looting the Global South continually decrease, this will give a lot more room to leftist organizing, progressive organizing. And you can see it right now, even in the issue of Palestine, where hundreds of thousands of people come out despite government threats, like, calling them marches for hate and stuff like that. So I think at the heart of it, the rise of the Global South brings forth opportunities, both for the Global South and the majority in Britain. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. I'm really honored to be on this one. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, William. And it's great to hear your perspective, and of course, important reminder there of the vast crimes committed by Britain, which they certainly haven't given reparations, let alone, not even an apology, let alone reparations. And again, I think it's important always for us to connect to the human impact, the human cost. So an important, example there of the treatment of a child in Congo versus somewhere like South San Francisco, and the sort of normalized racism that represents. And a really important point there to end with the connected nature of the struggles of working classes across North and South. And there seems to be a theme coming through here of a increasing opportunity to help that interconnectedness. Now, our next speaker, delighted to say, is Isabella Yasmin Kajiwara, the editor of Shadow Magazine. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and absolutely honored to be part of this conversation and alongside so many of you. And I think so many important points have been shared already, and I think it completely makes sense that Palestine is at the center and front of everyone's minds. And yeah, just to set out my framing and understanding of this, like in answering this question around what does the rise of the global South mean for Britain? You know, I'm coming at this not just in my editor role and, you know, mindset, but also as a border and prison abolitionist and organizer, an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist. So this is going to guide my interpretation of the situation, and I want to speak a bit to how, you know, the mass uprising we are seeing and mass mobilization around the world that we are seeing amongst many in, you know, across Britain and across the world. It is posing a direct threat to Britain's carceral logic, which, you know, lies at the very heart of, you know, its capitalist nation state project. So, yeah, I think the Palestinian youth movement in particular have put together very, very good and strong and accessible messaging around this on their social media, and also at, you know, all of the sit-ins, the direct actions, all of these things that have been happening around, you know, this concept of sharpening these contradictions so that we can challenge governments, not just by appealing to any sense of morality they have, because I doubt that that's going to change things. It's about really challenging the material investment that there is in this genocide and apartheid. And yeah, I think a big part of what the rise of the global South means to me at this point in time is seeing these various contingents of the global majority unite and overwhelmingly reject Israel's apartheid. And, you know, we've got protests, political organizing, commentary against imperialism in all of its forms, increasing in many ways. You know, we're talking about the depth, the range, the size, who's showing up to these protests and who's showing up to these and taking part in these actions, and the regularity of all of this as well, the speed. And, you know, this is not just being led and influenced by the global majority diaspora living in Britain, but also everyone else living at the sharp end of Tory austerity politics. So, yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge that social media, I think, is playing a massive role in this mobilization, whether it's, you know, the citizen journalism we're observing, the attempts to untangle a lot of the misinformation that's being spread, but also making people aware of how they can, you know, begin, if many are on the beginnings of their journey, like how they can learn and get more involved in an active sense. And I think, you know, this social media aspect has its strengths and limits. Like Roger said, there's a lot of new people coming into the fore that are newer to these radical spaces and organizing, which, you know, has its strengths and limits, you know, especially when it comes to the potential of infiltration from the police, surveillance, and all sorts. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, what we are seeing is not just any mass mobilization, but there's concerted efforts being made to educate people on the need to understand the struggle for Palestinian liberation as a distinctly anti-capitalist, internationalist, and anti-imperialist struggle. And yeah, this is not just because people are understanding this, not just because they're being told it, but they're being shown it through these global days of shutdown around the world that have been called for, these strikes, direct actions blocking weapons factories and manufacturers, sit-ins in public spaces. And in many ways, the Palestinian cause is internationalized by default. because all the governments involved are complicit and profiting, have these geopolitical interests. And, you know, as my one of my fellow editors at Shadow, Joey Ayub, has shared a couple of years ago in an article that they wrote on Palestine, these governments, you know, are learning from one another in how to oppress and police and surveil people. And, you know, if Britain is going to be part of this internationalist axis of global North powers arming Israel and manufacturing weapons and profiting from imperialist wars, then of course the resistance to that is going to be an internationalist one too. So yeah, I think we are witnessing in this moment that people are recognizing every site of suffering also offers a site of struggle and resistance and disruption. And they're recognizing that Britain's complicity in apartheid is material. And so the solidarity and resistance must be as well. Yeah, and, you know, bringing in this like abolitionist framing of this as well. This state-sanctioned apartheid and genocide is being actively supported by all of these Western powers because it's seen by many as, you know, the domino that once it falls is going to have a ripple effect on, you know, Britain's future, but also, you know, other countries' future, both geopolitically, domestically, and electorally. That's why, one of the many reasons why I think we're witnessing such a strong and systematic policing and surveillance reaction to what is going on, because the UK government is going to fight tooth and nail to prevent ceasefire and Palestinian liberation efforts. You know, we've got comrades being filmed at protests by police, and they're using all sorts of intelligence gathering methods, you know, at the peaceful, bigger marches as well. And, you know, organizers are being trailed home from protests by police. People are being arrested and charged under the Terrorist Act. Kids are being censored and surveyed through the prevent duty. And I think Netpol are really doing a good job of collating all of these policing and surveillance tactics. I think we're going to see more and more of this from the British state. And of course, it's necessary to look at this through a carceral lens, because in many ways, Israel's apartheid is like the capital of the empire of carcerality. It's where a lot of weapons are being battle tested and then sold. And the Israeli government relies on carceral logic to dominate and extinguish Palestinian life, and this obsession with collective punishment and turning Gaza into an open air prison and concentration camp. And, you know, that logic, the potential of that logic being exposed and dismantled, as we're seeing, is posing an existential threat to governments like Britain that rely on their monopoly on acceptable uses of violence to maintain legitimacy and statehood. So, yeah, I think what this moment demands of Britain is to look and think very hard about how it responds to all of this organizing and mass protest. Like I said before, I personally don't have much hope that, I don't think what's going to change this is trying to appeal to the government's sense of morality. It's going to be through challenging this like materially, and on top of this, we're seeing that organization is becoming more and more structured and strategic. There's efforts being made at organizing for the day after there's a ceasefire and thinking in the long term. So yeah, those are some of the collection of my thoughts when it comes to the rise of the global South and the impact it's having and will have on Britain. And I think a foreign policy that contributes towards peace and prosperity is unlikely to come from David Cameron. But at the end of the day, any foreign policy from Britain that has any peace involved in it, it's not going to be possible without immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the cessation of arming Israel with weapons. I think as far as many people are concerned, there's no more business as usual in Britain or peace until Palestine is free. The public aren't going to give up on this anytime soon. And I think I'll probably leave it there in keeping time in consideration. But thank Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabella. That was a very comprehensive look at mobilization, I think, in this day and age, especially the drawbacks and limitations, and also the advantages of social media, which is the bane of many of our existence. But our next speaker, and I have to say, is Vijay Prashad. I am expecting some fire and brimstone. No pressure, Vijay. But it's Vijay Prashad, the director of Tricontinental Institute. Take it away, Vijay.
Thanks a lot. Well, firstly, I'm very grateful to No Cold War Britain for inviting me. This is a very important issue to discuss and think about. I want to start with the return of David Cameron to government, because it's both a reason for hilarity and for alarm. It's a reason for hilarity and laughter because it shows how narrow is the bench of the British rulers, so limited that they have to return to the old Bullingdon elite to fill their ranks. But it's also alarm because we should not forget that it was David Cameron who shone the green light for the destruction of Libya, not unlike the behavior of his predecessor, Tony Weapons of Mass Destruction Blair. These are dangerous people, and these kinds of people working for a class that cares little about humanity often do dangerous things. Now, what makes the Camerons of the world dangerous is that they are fighting tooth and nail to defend the indefensible. The structures of neocolonial authority no longer have the legitimacy that they once had. People in the global south, who since at least the 1990s have felt under pressure to bow down before the Group of Seven, have now produced a new mood, a new atmosphere that wants to put their national self-interest before the pretend global interest of the West. This new mood has been accelerated by the war in Ukraine and by the genocidal bombardment of the Palestinians in Gaza by the Israelis. After Russian troops entered Ukrainian territory, the United States and its NATO confederates were puzzled that the global South countries, even quite reliable allies, failed to condemn, actually not failed, refused to condemn Russia. New bold language emerged, words that had been buried for decades. South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperations, Naledi Pandor, told the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, by the way, he was sitting right next to her, and she said to him that her country would not be bullied any longer. We are sovereign states, said Naledi Pandor. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said that India wants Russia and Ukraine to get back to dialogue and diplomacy. We make judgments in foreign policy, he said, based on what we think are our long-term interests and what is good for the world. The idea of sovereignty is key here, as is the desire amongst these rising powers to no longer be instructed by Washington about their opinions. You know, this idea that why aren't they condemning? Tell them to condemn. Send Blinken on a tour of Africa to get countries to condemn. Sorry, Blinken, those days are over. More evidence of this desire for a less suffocating world has been in evidence during Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Two actions in the United Nations illustrate this mood. First, the UN General Assembly voted 187-2 with one abstention for the United States to cease its embargo against Cuba. Only the United States and Israel voted against the resolution, and only Ukraine abstained at a time when it was very clear that the United States is one of the main funders and diplomatic backers of the wars by Israel and Ukraine. Second, in the UN Third Committee, 126 countries voted to end illegal unilateral coercive measures, including all manner of sanctions. And by the way, the Western states, led by the United States, all voted by themselves against that resolution. Among the 126 countries, almost the entirety of the global South. Both votes come alongside the groundswell of frustration with how the United States is enabling the Israeli war. Whether it's the 2 million people on the streets of Jakarta, Indonesia, against this war, or the 1 million people in Istanbul, Turkey, they were not just criticizing Israel, they were criticizing the United States. Just these two demonstrations, by the way, had 3 million people on the streets. Just in case people have not been following the demonstrations around the world, focused only on the demonstrations in the West, pay attention to what's happening elsewhere. Massive, massive demonstrations. The fragility of US power begins with the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and the withdrawal of US forces from Iraq and Afghanistan. Go back and listen to Syed Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah's speech, the first speech he gave after this October 7th, where he talked about the fact the United States was defeated in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Nasrallah said, if you keep your 72 warships in the Eastern Mediterranean, when it suits us, we can sink them. Wow, what language. Haven't heard that kind of language in a long time. Afraid of the economic rise of the global South, led by China, the West has struggled to retain its power. It cannot marshal the necessary economic forces, largely because the Western elite has shrugged off its responsibility to pay taxes and contribute patriotically to their countries, and also because of the failure to drive an investment agenda both within the West and around the world. And those of you in Britain well know the cancellation of HS2 is a case in point. You cannot even build a train line in your own country. What are you going to help the rest of the world with? Therefore, the United States and its NATO allies, because they can't push an economic agenda, are attempting to use military force to overcome their decline in authority. What the West controls is the means of destruction. US military spending by itself is now at $1.537 trillion per year out of a total global military budget of $2.87 trillion. If you add to the US military budget, the budget of the NATO states, $381 billion US dollars, and the US dominated non-NATO military allies, Japan, South Korea, and so on, $234 billion, then the total US-led military bloc spends $2.15 trillion a year, or 75% of world military spending. Okay, let's now discuss who is the main belligerent in the planet, who is the real terrorist in the planet. 3/4 of military spending is the Western-led military bloc. Just for comparison, China spends only 10% of the world's military spending. That's 15 times less per capita than the United States. 15 times less per capita. And yet the US says it's China that is out here trying to create problems. Seriously, you'd have to have lost your mind to believe US propaganda. Global South countries are not keen on dividing the world into camps, but have instead said they want to build a collaborative agenda rooted in the UN Charter and multilateral institutions. It is the emergence of this attitude that has shaped the response of the Global South to, among other things, the violence by the Israelis against the Palestinians. No longer are these countries willing to be instructed by Washington on how to think. Men like Cameron know that the West is fragile. The West no longer fully controls finance, raw materials, and science and technology. What the West has is military force. What makes the West dangerous is that in this time of fragility, it uses this military power to try and hold on to its hegemony. Western countries would prefer to make the world like a devastated Libya than learn to collaborate as equals. Tacitus, the Roman scribe, described the battle of the Caledonians, the old Scots, their confederacy against the Romans. At one point, Tacitus writes, the Caledonian leader, Calgacus, whose name means prickly, by the way, says of the Romans, they have made a solitude and called it peace. That is the habit of imperialists. That is what we have to resist. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant as ever. Thanks so much, VJ. I think if there's a prize for information per minute, you've decidedly won that one there. And some obviously very important points raised in terms of the global south not bowing to the West. And I thought that quote really summarized it, that they will not be bullied. And of course, the 187-2 vote in the UN against the embargo on Cuba is symbolic of that. And unfortunately, there is that settler colonial solidarity, if you like, between the US and Israel. And again, very important to note, there's millions on the street, not just in the West. It's across the globe. And that was a nice point in terms of the inability of Britain to even complete a train line. And just one small point coming back to social media that came to mind earlier in relation to Palestine. For those that don't follow, there are 3 particular young Palestinians called Bisan, Plestia, Motaz, and they're doing God's work in most horrific conditions. So it's just a sort of quick shout out to them because they're sort of the world's eyes and ears in many respects. But thank you very much, VJ. Next, we have our very own Fiona Edwards, No Cold War International and No Cold War Britain Committee. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Sequoia. And I just want to say it's a real privilege to share this platform with so many brilliant voices for peace in Britain and internationally. And I think it's unfortunately a rare opportunity to hear such a wide-ranging global discussion about Britain's role in the world, because in British politics, we have a real lack of engagement with different viewpoints across the world. The perspectives of people from Asia, Africa, Latin America are too often shut out of the political discussion entirely. And this is taking place at precisely the time, as we've heard this evening, where the global south is rising and putting forward an independent political and economic agenda, which is based on increasingly on peace, cooperation and development. And one of the key goals of No Cold War Britain is to create a space where these developments can be discussed. Because it's really important to have this wide discussion, this global discussion, to understand exactly how isolated Britain actually is internationally, and the fact that there are alternatives to the path that Britain is going down, which is war and austerity and racism and climate change vandalism. In Britain, we've got a really dire mainstream political consensus. Both the Tory government and the Labour Party leadership agree that Britain's role in the world is as a junior partner to the United States, and that the rise of the global south is something that needs to be stopped. The British Empire is long gone, but the colonial mindset, unfortunately, remains largely intact in the British political establishment. And this is seeing the views and aspirations of the majority of humanity regarded with suspicion and hostility. I think a number of speakers have pointed out that we are living through a really important moment in history. Significant changes are taking place in the world with the rise of the global south. But these are also very perilous times, which I think is something VJ was really emphasizing. The economic power of the United States is waning. And in this situation, the US is resorting more and more to using its military power to stop the great shifts we are witnessing in international relations today. Over the past decade, just one statistic kind of shows where the trajectory is. China contributed to 40% of global growth in the last 10 years, while the US contributed only 22% and the Eurozone 9%. This growth of China and relative decline of the United States is seen as completely intolerable by US elites. And thus, the US is becoming more aggressive. We've had the so-called war on terror that ended with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, but look what's happened in the last couple of years. The US has been pushing for a NATO proxy war in Ukraine against a nuclear armed power, Russia. There's been building up the massive military buildup in the Pacific against China, and now backing Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. So I just want to kind of take a moment just to look at some of the key developments in the global south that Washington regards as so threatening. So number one, the extraordinary economic, social and technological development of China over the past 40 years. So the US sees bringing 850 million people out of poverty, and the transformation of China from one of the poorest countries in the world to a global superpower and an economic powerhouse as a problem, as a major threat to its hegemony. So this human progress is a problem. Number two, the rise and expansion of BRICS as an expression of the rise of the global south. So from January 2024, the BRICS is set to expand from its founding 5 members to include 6 other new countries: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The fact that arch enemies, Iran and Saudi Arabia, have been brought together into a cooperative framework of the Global South organization, that in itself is a major blow to US political strategy of divide and rule in the Middle East. And also is the fact that BRICS will account for 37% of GDP compared to 30% from the G7. This is seen as a major threat to US hegemony. Number 3, the Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched 10 years ago. This is a key initiative for development in the Global South. So over the past 10 years, this initiative has attracted the support of 150 countries internationally, and there are 3,000 projects in the Belt and Road Initiative which are worth $1 trillion. So these are really enormous numbers to get your head around. So I just wanted to share an experience from my visit to Nicaragua earlier this year in July to kind of paint a bit of a picture of this. So Nicaragua is one of the countries that signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative in 2022. And this year, Nicaragua and China have started their first major project together, which is building affordable housing. The first phase of this will see 920 units built in Managua with central square, sports fields, and other facilities, the infrastructure to sustain new communities. And I asked a member of National Assembly when I was there, Professor Zubida, how Nicaragua's relationship with China differs from the United States. And he said the following: "We are bombarded with the idea that Russia and China are the aggressors. US troops have been on our soil 7 times. So we are very clear on who promotes military aggression because we have experienced it." And he went on to say that cooperation with China comes with no strings attached, no conditions, and no aggression, just support. And this story in Nicaragua, this is like stories all over the world in the Global South. And that's why a kind of some phrase that's become quite popular is that where China has a Belt and Road Initiative, the United States has a bomb and ruin initiative. So that's quite a popular phrase that's circulating. Number 4, in terms of what are the threats as far as the United States is concerned from the Global South. Number 4 is most countries in the world reject Washington's offensive against Russia. And this has been really clearly seen in relation to the war in Ukraine. The Global South has refused to apply the sanctions against Russia that the West have and want the Global South to go along with. And many countries have been putting forward proposals for a peace process to end the war, from China to African Mission to Lula in Brazil. So it's really clear that the Global South is rejecting NATO's constant escalation in Ukraine, which has the explicit goal of weakening Russia. Today, as we've discussed, the international situation is being dominated by Israel's barbaric attack on Gaza, which is fully supported and sustained by the West, in particular the United States. And it does need to be emphasized that without the diplomatic, political, military support of the United States, European powers, and of course Britain, Israel wouldn't be in a position to wage this genocidal war on Gaza and sustain its occupation and colonization of Palestine. And if I was to put it very bluntly, the US President Biden could pick up the phone to Netanyahu and order a ceasefire, and there would be a ceasefire. So as to why the British government is refusing to back a ceasefire, despite all these massive protests and I think 76% of the population supporting it, because Britain's foreign policy is made in Washington. And as has been said by other speakers very eloquently, Israel, the United States, and Britain and other Western countries are defying an overwhelming international majority on Gaza. So you've had the vote at the UN, 140 countries voted for a ceasefire at the UN General Assembly on the 20th of October. There were only 14 countries that voted against a ceasefire. And tens of millions of people have taken to the streets to protest in support of Palestine in every continent of the world. And this is a movement that is growing. So we've got Israel, the United States, and Britain are extremely isolated, and other lackeys in the global north as well that are going along with this genocide. So why is the United States refusing to back a ceasefire? I think the Economist put it quite starkly. They had a front cover in October which had the headline, picture of Biden, the headline, "America's Test." And I'm going to quote from it. The Israel-Hamas war will define America's global role. President Joe Biden has sent 2 hulking aircraft carriers to support Israel. They are a 200,000-ton show of strength at a time when much of the world believes that American power is in decline. The war and its aftermath will test that perception against reality. So yeah, you did hear that right. This is very diabolical thinking. This is a situation where Washington sees the situation in Gaza as an opportunity to show its power as a global hegemon. So you've got world opinion clearly with Gaza, clearly for a ceasefire, but Israel and the US are willing to pay a price, and they will pay a price in order to demonstrate their military power. So just finally, just want to say, Britain is taking the side of the United States against China, against the global South, and let's be clear, against the majority of humanity. And I want to quote Chinese intellectual Zhang Weiwei, who puts the global situation quite succinctly, I think, when he says, the West policy is to divide and conquer, divide and rule, and China's policy is to unite and prosper. And what we're seeing is developing countries are focusing on achieving economic growth, building development projects. Obviously, there's many contradictions within organizations like BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative, but that is the emphasis, and that's where they're pushing forward to. Whereas in the West, we've got economic stagnation, austerity, declining living standards, and rising military spending. Of course, in this situation, Britain should be embracing a more democratic world, which would mean embracing the rise of the global South and pursuing mutually beneficial cooperation. But currently, Britain is facing off to fight against these trends as a junior partner to the United States, and this offers no way forward for the British people, no way forward for humanity. And I think building an international peace movement is a key way we can challenge this trajectory. And in doing so, we have to be confident that although often it feels like we're in a minority, although on the question of Palestine, we're certainly not in a minority here in Britain, although it sometimes does feel like we're in a minority, we are on the side of the majority internationally, we're on the side of humanity, and we will overcome.
Thank you so much, Fiona. This has been a brilliant, absolutely brilliant panel of speakers. Thank you all for coming. I hope everyone watching has learned as much as I have. There seems to be a clear divide between those that want to keep the unipolar status quo and those who are pursuing a multipolar world. And perhaps to put it in a somewhat simpler way, a divide between those who believe the rising tide lifts all boats and those who believe in a zero-sum game. For us, in the belly of the beast, taking that imperialist track of a zero-sum game will inevitably result in a clear downward trajectory, as we're all witnessing right now. One of our main objectives as No Cold War Britain is to change that trajectory, to stop our self-defeating warmongering, which is bad for Britain as well as the world. Informing and educating the wider public about what our current line is and how it is resulting in our decline is a key component of our agenda. So we'd like to thank again all of these wonderful speakers on this panel for being a part of this fight. Thank you all. And all of you watching, please help us by liking, subscribing, and commenting. Even if you want to comment negatively, that's fine. It will help the dreaded algorithm. So please do this below this video. Also, you can follow us all on socials. We are on Twitter at NCW Britain, Facebook at No Cold War Britain, Instagram at No Cold War_Britain, and TikTok at No Cold War Britain. And we have a monthly podcast, which I've already plugged earlier. But please check that out. It's on Spotify, Amazon Music, and here on YouTube. All links will be in the description below. Our last episode was with the lovely Tings Chuck of Tricontinental and Dongshan News. And our next episode will be with Andrew Feinstein. We will be talking about Palestine, which, speaking of, there are ongoing demonstrations and marches and protests. So, see you all out there. Finally, to wrap us up, we will end with a couple of songs from our very own Scottish singer-songwriter, Callum Bard. I hope I said that right, and I apologize if I said your name incorrectly, Callum, but please play us off. Did I say it right?
It's Beard, but don't worry. I've had Beard.
At one job.
At least you didn't call me Callum Beard, so that's something. That's something.
Thank you,
I just want to
Callum.
check, can you all hear the guitar this time? Woohoo! Great success. Excellent. Oh no, Roger looks like he can't hear it. You can? You can?
We can hear, yeah.
Okay, right. Okay. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for having me here tonight and for being part of this brilliant event. It's been very inspiring to listen to you all and to hear what you have to say and to really feel the internationalism within this debate and discussion, that it's not just something that's happening amongst a small group of people in Britain, that this is something that the whole world is aware of and is fighting back against and organising to confront imperialism as it pushes us towards destruction and conflict. I'm going to play you two songs just now. They're both relatively short. This first one is called It's 4 AM. They're both my own songs, I should say. This first one is called It's 4 AM. And it's about when you are supposed to be asleep, but you can't because you gaslight yourself into an existential crisis. Well, it's 4 AM and I'm writing this song. What could possibly go wrong? It must have been just before 2 when I came up with the tune as I cross-examine my own head. I think of all the stupid things I did and all the stupid things I said I'd do. Well, these thoughts come around 2:30 just as I reached for my shelf to read a book. I think it was by Gramsci, I didn't really look. My thoughts moved on from mocking me to war, fascism and austerity. Now don't you dare drift off when I can't sleep. It's time we talked about the need for peace. When so much here is going on, is it any wonder I'm writing this song? As the clock ticks over to the hour of 3, I see a ghostly figure I take to be me. Crisis after crisis, another lost decade. This is overplayed as I look upon the first light of the sun. I ask myself what is to be done about the circus of negativity that's filling the air with hostility. Now I'm so tired, yet I can't sleep. Sleep only comes when you're at peace. And when so much here is going on, is it any wonder I'm writing this song? Cheers. Thanks.
We're all clapping, by the way, if you can't hear us.
Thanks. I can, yeah. It's all right. It's okay. I've played gigs before where nobody claps. It's okay. Okay, I'm going to do you one last song. And again, thank you for having me here and as part of this fantastic event. If you want to check out my music, I suppose I could give myself a plug. My website is callumbaird.com. 1 L in Callum, no L's in Baird. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and all that sort of stuff as well. I'm on Spotify and Amazon and everywhere. So you can find me there if you want. This next song I'm going to do for you is one I wrote back in the at the start of the year, and I released it in the summertime. It's called Beauty in the Worst of Times, and it's based on a poem by the great German playwright and poet Bertolt Brecht, who has a poem which is fairly lengthy, but there's a line in it that says, will there be singing in the dark times? And he says, yes, there will be singing about the dark times. So this song is based on that, but it's also based on Antonio Gramsci, who I mentioned in the previous song there, who he has this famous quote that's attributed to him: "Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will." And this song, I try to capture that idea in song, and I guess to try to encourage people who are seeking alternatives in the world, who are feeling alienated, very confused, sort of lost and alone on the highway, trying to find a way through all this chaos and conflict, trying to encourage them to sort of forge on and persevere. So this is called Beauty in the Worst of Times. I've been standing out in the rain, thinking about changing the weather over and again. Been feeling fragmentary, like a painting incomplete, but I don't want to be defined by thoughts of defeat. So you paint the flowers and I'll write the songs. Even in cheerless places, the show must go on. There will be singing in dark times too. I won't be shifted from this point of view. Gold from corrosion, so simple yet divine. Beauty in the worst of times. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks very much.
That's beautiful.
Hope to
Thank
see you again at some other show or some event in person somewhere maybe. I'm playing shows all around the place. I'm going to be in Berlin in January at the Rosa Luxemburg conference, so if you happen to be there, come and say hello. I'll be playing some songs. So it's been a pleasure to play for you tonight, and keep on fighting. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Callum. Appreciate it, everyone. Take care. Great contributions.
you. Bye, everyone.